Okay, so lesson 1, algebra 1, module 1. This is sort of an introduction and a review of what piecewise functions are. So we start with the idea of a function, and the functions are what you put into something, you always get something back. And so here in the first piecewise function, you'll notice that this is a little less in terms of complexity as the one you saw last week, but there are 3 different levels, and that means there are going to be 3 different parts of the graph. And so here, as we go to graph this, we know that from when x right here, when x is less than 1, when x is less than 1, so here's 1, f of x is always -2. So for instance, as we look here, less than 1 is always -2. Now notice there's no equal sign, and so we're going to have an open circle here. Because there's no equal sign, the circle at 1, unless the circle is open. If it was equal, x is less than or equal to, we would close that circle. Who remembers that? Raise it with a raised hand. And so the first part of the piecewise function starts at the top with f of x is equal to -2 when the domain is x is less than 1. The second part. So the second part, we've done the first part, is between 1 and 3. F of x is equal to 3. And so up here, between 1 and 3, f of x is equal to 3. In other words, this is the f of x, or the range, and this is the x. Here you have an equal sign along with the less than, and so we're going to close that circle in. But there's no equals there, and so we're going to leave that open. And so here's the second part of the piecewise function. And then the third part, x is greater than or equal to 3. It's constantly 4, and so we move up. We color it in. We go off to the right. And so here we have 3 pieces. The first piece, when x is less than 1, it's always -2. When x is 1 to 3, f of x is always 3. And there's an open circle here because it's not equal to. And then the third part, f of x is always 4 at greater than or equal to. And so you can see that these lines are all horizontal lines, and that is the beginning of our discussion with piecewise function here today. The fact that there are 3 parts means there's going to be 3 parts to the graph. Okay, so we'll take a screenshot of that. We can review it in a minute. And we'll come back. The next graph is going to be a little more involved. And so here our next graph is 2 parts. So how many, as you look here, you have 2 equations. That implies you're probably going to have 2 pieces on the graph. And this, you can see that you have g of x, which it doesn't really matter what we call it. G of x is equal to -2x plus 1, the first part. And g of x is equal to x minus 1 on the second part. And so we start with just focus on the first part. So the first part is right here. Oops. So let's focus on this part right here. So we would graph this part like it was y is equal to -2x. We go back to 8th grade math, where we know that this number represents the slope, and this number represents the y-intercept. Raise your hand if you remember that. And so when we do this, we're pulling on previous knowledge of how to graph lines. 2 separate lines given when x is less than 0 and when x is greater than 0. So we're going to start with that. And so we go back here, and let's start with graphing this. First of all, let's graph this. And x is less than 0. So here's 0. And so we know that -2x plus 1, the slope crosses at 1. And the slope is going to be down 1, 2 over 1. Up 2 over 1. Up 2 over 1. So here's your line. Now x is less than 0. That means here's on this side what that looks like. Now because this is not equals to, we have to go back and we have to change that to an open circle. That has to be an open circle. So the first part, we graph it like a regular line. We notice that x is less than 0, so we have to have an open circle. And everything to the left of 0 is that red line right there. And that's the first part of the piecewise function, g of x. The second part, you're going to graph in blue this time, this part. Again, this is where it crosses the y-axis, so at -1. And because it's equal to, we're going to go ahead and close it in. I know it's going to be closed in. And the slope, well, the slope, there's no number there. That means the slope is 1 over 1. That's the slope. And so from this point, go up 1 over 1. Up 1 over 1. And here's your line. And so here is the piecewise function for g of x. It's a review of graphing lines, a review of how to represent greater than and equal to, less than or equal to, or just greater than or less than. Fill in the circles, leave them open. And so this is where we leave off, and we head back into lesson 1 to finish up. Okay, I'm going to stop the video and you can rewind it, watch it again. This is, again, a review of piecewise functions, lesson 1, module 1. This is fun. This is incredible. And stop recording. Ooh, good. Stop. Yes.